Welcome to today's episode. We have another great discussion, topic, and program planned that Active Prospect has assembled as we help the lead generation and performance marketing industry navigate the most recent FCC one-to-one consent rules, record-keeping requirements, and related updates to the TCPA or Telephone Consumer Protection Act. The content we're putting together today will help you understand these changes with more confidence and a focus on compliance. Today's topic, the compliance blueprint, preparing for TCPA and CMS updates in the digital age. First, some housekeeping notes. And our webinar platform, there is a chat icon and a questions icon. And we encourage you to ask questions as we have someone on the team monitoring them throughout. Please use the chat section for general comments and interactions with other participants. And please use the questions section if there are items you'd like to pose to us to answer. We'll leave time at the end to review and respond to your questions. And we'll also have a brief survey at the end of this webinar. And please share your feedback and what you'd like to hear from us in the future. And links to the live recording will be emailed out tomorrow morning for your reference and sharing with your colleagues. Hello, I'm Benjamin Farah. I'm the Director of Privacy, Security, and Compliance at Active Prospect. And for the past 20 years, I've worked for companies in the performance marketing and market research space, including Dentsu and WPP Kantar, as well as Ernst & Young in New York and Ochsner Clinic Hospital in New Orleans, Louisiana, with much focus on data privacy, data regulation compliance, internal auditing, and information security. And in every one of these industries and jobs, a significant data regulation was passed, and I was on the team responsible for reviewing and translating these new rules and working to seek clarity and establishing a compliance program. And now for a brief background and introduction, I'd like to pass the mic to my co-host today, Michael Paranto.
Great, thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. So for everybody here, I'm Michael Paranto. I'm the Director of Professional Services here at Active Prospect. A little bit of background about myself. I've been in the CRM, contact center, and lead management space for 13 years. I previously worked for CRM companies, including Velocify and Shape Software. I've done large implementations and consultation services on contact center softwares, including Five9 and NICE inContact. And some of my previous experience includes I was the Director of Lead Marketing for Cardinal Financial Company Limited Partnership, where I oversaw a multi-million-dollar monthly lead buy. With that in mind, I'm going to pass it over to Mel Marsh. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to see you again. I'm Mel Marsh, and I've spent most of my career, honestly, in financial services. So good number of years, I think about 16 of them actually in the insurance space and 10 or so in banking, and then a few in the private mortgage space. And so primarily in marketing, but internet marketing specifically, that kind of dates me back, right? Like I remember when Yellow Pages first went digital. So I've been in this space a while, certainly training agents, on how to use web tools and how to grow their business digitally while being safe. Has been a big part of my career over the last 20 years.
That's great, Mel. Thank you. And we look forward to our discussion here today. So in my role in compliance, it's important to keep track of the dates that are coming up, and we've got a number of them. So let me run through those right quick. So first, in order of calendar dates, what you need to be looking out for. So the FCC TCPA update that was announced in February, this past February, implications of artificial intelligence or AI technologies and protecting consumers from unwanted robocalls and robotext. What are we talking about? This is the use of AI-generated voice in calling, and it requires prior express written consent, right? So we're talking about the notice and opt-in language that's being provided. So the scope is use of artificial or pre-recorded voice, AI technologies that resemble human voices and generate call content. It clearly says it falls under the scope of TCPA. So check your notice and opt-in language now, or seek legal advice to determine if your notice opt-in language includes these disclosures, as it was effective on the date it was announced, which was this past February. The second item is the CMS updates. This is what we're going to be talking about in more detail here today. This was announced in April 2024, and CMS is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Many impacts from this update. We're not covering all of those today, but for the audience here, the most relevant for lead generation and performance marketing is the October 1st, 2024 deadline to start collecting one-to-one consent related to TPMO data sharing. What are TPMOs? third-party marketing organizations, and some of you out there in the audience may meet this classification. It sets data sharing limitations, requires TPMOs to obtain beneficiary prior express written consent before sharing personal data with other TPMOs. The CMS update cited, interestingly, the FCC's TCPA one-to-one direction on consent. So a movement from not sharing one transaction going into many different parties. It moves to more of a one-to-one identifiable consent transaction for parties downstream. The third item is the FCC TCPA update, empowering consumers to block robocalls and robotexts. So circle the month of October and stay tuned. This is where the use of regulated technologies, calls or texts, consumers are allowed to use any reasonable means or communications to say stop or opt out. This could be text messages back or emails, and it requires companies to honor these do not call and revocation of consent requests as soon as possible and no more than 10 business days. Stay tuned. This is not indefinitely final, but we're looking at as October, in which this may resurface. The fourth item, the Federal Trade Commission updates to their TSR, our telemarketing sales rules. Key deadline, October 15th of 2024. Key impacts, expanded record-keeping requirements, additional fields, and including a record of the consent to contact transaction before calling in the outreach. Also, record retention was extended from 2 to 5 years, and the FCC can take action on some decisions. And the fifth item, the thing that started all of this journey, the FCC's TCPA update, targeting and eliminating unlawful text messages, advanced methods to target and eliminate unlawful robocalls. This is the one-to-one consent requirements. It also has new record-keeping requirements within there. It introduced the term logical and topical. This relates to your website designs and transparency, and text messages clearly covered in the National Do Not Call program. Key deadline for that is January 27th, 2025. But remember, there's the 30, 60, 90 days prior. When you're documenting your leads, they need to have that opt-in consent information. So now, digging in deeper to our topic today, the compliance blueprint, preparing for TCPA and CMS updates in the digital age. Michael.
Great, thanks, Ben. So before we get started with the rest of this webinar here, there's just a couple of definitions that I'd like to point out to the audience. So not everybody here is in the insurance vertical. So when we refer to the CMS, that's the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. It's basically the equivalent to like the FCC or the FTC that just provides rules to the insurance vertical. And then when we talk about TPMOs, these are third-party marketing organizations, and it's really just an entity that is paid to perform marketing, sales, lead generation, and enrollment-related functions for Medicare Advantage and Medicare Part D plans. Something that I thought was interesting, I was looking more into the rule on October 1st. That rule that's coming in by the CMS also has a specific component that talks about checkboxes in lead generation forms. So in the rule, it states that the TPMO can use a consent method where the default selection is that the beneficiary chooses to not share their data. So basically what it's saying is that if you are encountering a form and there are multiple entities that are listed, that you cannot actually pre-check the box before you submit it before that form is submitted. I thought that was just an interesting item there. The second one that I thought was interesting is in the CMS rule, unlike the TCPA, which has an ATT automated telephone dialing system component, in the CMS rule, it actually covers manual dials to customers, which is a very different differentiation between those two. So with that in mind, Mel, I'd like to move this over to you. So I would like you to provide us with a high-level overview of Guided Solutions, how it operates. And when you and I spoke previously, you had mentioned that you guys offer marketing technology solutions that help your agents stay compliant and competitive. Can you talk about those as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So Guided Solutions is actually the personal arm, if you will, of the Baldwin Group. So the Baldwin Group is a large insurance broker that offers commercial, like if you think about it, we insure it, including things like cold feet insurance if you're getting married and the father of the bride wants to have some insurance in case the groom changes his mind. We sell that too.
Yep.
So we're the personal market or personal insurance arm of that. And we offer as a broker. So we work with different carriers to provide insurance coverage for auto, home, life, small commercial like mom and pop, think of that. And then on the other side of that is Medicare.
Got it.
And you asked me about the tech stack. We as an FMO, which is what our field marketing organization, which is what our Medicare side of the house is. So we contract in 1099 agents as opposed to, they write their contracts through us as opposed to them being employed by us directly. And then, we offer them technical services and support across the board, right? So whether that is sort of business strategic to help them grow their business, or like from my side of the house, it's how do we give them marketing technologies that allows them to market themselves and grow their business in a compliant way, right? So without the stuff that we offer, they would have to create their own flyers, interpret the rules, figure out they've interpreted them correctly, create those pieces and put them out there, and then hope that everything is out there compliantly, right? So we offer those tools that make that a whole lot easier.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You're providing these technologies to the agents or the agencies that subscribe to them, and that really helps you with just your overall general compliance, right? You're providing some of that content for them, and even some education. So, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced with educating your agents and on the importance of compliance?
Medicare specifically, let's talk about that side, right? Because AEP, annual enrollment period, is fast approaching. And so we're in the thick of getting everything ready for that. And a lot of agents have been very successful growing their business, creating a very robust book for themselves for years, right? All by themselves, because it's a one-to-one business. You ask for referrals. It's that type of thing. But then when you want to grow beyond that, how do you do that in a streamlined way, right? Or in a way that just helps you, like I said, do it properly without exposing yourself. And so we have teams that will help interpret the CMS rules and share those rules out. We digest them. So they don't have to read 26 pages of stuff. We actually digest that out, right? And then share those updates and those points of view. We don't direct agents because obviously they work for themselves, but we give them strong guidance, right? It's like, here it is, and you can choose to adopt it or not, but this is how we've interpreted it for you. And then there's a host of people behind me that also offer webinars to help people understand education, email updates of carrier updates, things like that. So we have an ongoing system of education to help agents understand how to operate in the environment while still growing or supporting the business that they have.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting, Mel. You're taking these rules and regulations from the CMS, and you're basically translating them and providing them in regular updates to these agents and agencies, so that way they can stay compliant with these existing rules. And some of these challenges, transcend the insurance vertical too. Keeping, I come from financial services as well, and helping to keep like loan officers or salespeople compliant is a massive task. And I feel like a lot of organizations, especially the large ones, really struggle with this, right? So if you think about it, when you join a company, you go through the initial training. The initial training includes introduction to different departments, how they all work and operate. And then you get systems related training, and then you get compliance related training. And usually it's a one and done sort of circumstance, where my approach to it is really, I believe that you should be doing continuous education from both the compliance as well on sales systems. So, and that can be done with things like, you mentioned sending out emails, bulletins, you could do training on site, you could do virtual trainings.
We do virtual.
And a lot of times I've found, especially with training them on systems, even bringing in some of your more seasoned employees, bringing them in and talk to them about the different tools and how it can help them stay compliant, but also talk to them about some of the sales components of it as well, can really bring some value. So I've experienced this myself. I've seen employees who've been with companies for years. They think they know everything. You go through, you give them some tips and tricks on the systems. You have them even talk to each other about the platform, and they can really learn a lot and help to drive additional revenue and sales. I'd like to talk a little bit, in your vertical in particular, in the insurance vertical, you have a lot of agents. Some of them have already moved into the digital age. They're used to using technology, the stuff that you offer. What are some challenges that you've had with, some of the legacy agents who may not have caught up with, the current times in regards to technology?
Just that, right? They've done their business. Some of them are using Rolodexes. Some use Excel spreadsheets, notepads. Like, it runs the gamut. It depends on when they did their grind, right? Meaning you get your book, you get out there as a new agent. It happens it doesn't matter what insurance you're selling, right? Like, at some point, even if you're, an SDR for a SaaS company, wherever you are, at some point as a salesperson, you're doing your grind, and how you manage that. And so let's get to those opt-ins. So we don't default anything. We ask you to, as a customer, you have to opt in, and we collect that opt-in and we store it. But you can imagine, for people that are not using our tools, we have strategic partners that are part of our tech stack, right? It's deliberately third-party owned as opposed to ours, because the relationship is between the agent and that third-party platform. So that means if they disconnect from us, they can take it and go somewhere else. They may have a different pricing structure, but they can continue their business somewhere else. So we've kind of got them at every step of the way in terms of supporting them. But those that aren't at that place yet, they're still back where they've got mountains of filing cabinets, because to your point earlier about CMS and collecting that explicit opt-in, it's the consent to contact, right? They have to collect that. It's a piece of paper. It sits somewhere in a drawer. I mean, it's a lot easier to collect that and say, hey, we can actually make your life easier, because now you have this groovy landing page, by the way, and you can actually connect. So we melded the CMS consent to contact and the TCPA contact, right? And put those together because both are necessary. And these are agents that are really used to operating in the world of, well, I need my CMS. I've got my consent to contact from CMS. I'm like, yes, but you actually need TCPA as well, right? And where's the form for that? Well, now because they've not really had to worry or think about that previously, right? And so for the most part, I mean, there's obviously there's always people on the spectrum of what they do and what they understand, right? And so, there are those adopters, but there's a lot of agents that don't, because they haven't had to worry about that. And so now showing them that they can continue to grow, but in a way that actually makes life easier for them, so they don't have a filing cabinet full of pieces of paper that say, it was all right for me to contact you. Can you imagine getting audited and having to look through that? So a lot of the challenges is just showing, I'm going to say teaching old dogs new tricks, but old is not as in age, right? It's just the way you do things and your preferred method of doing business. And then saying, I know this has been super successful for you, but we can actually help you elevate you and be even more successful, or in the very least, just make the compliance end of this a whole lot smoother for you so that you're not leaving yourself exposed.
Yeah, and I would think that's key. I mean, it probably intersects with the aging population in which they're serving. They may not be comfortable with the technology, but the rules of which you all are trying to put in place and allow the technology components to make it digital, it's interesting because that's the part that then allows better protection of privacy or information security of those types of records, and even faster processing of them in an expected format, all the sort of components and dates and fields, where paper things can go awry and you might not know, or efficiency. So it allows some additional technology protections to
right. So Ben, perfect case in point. Now we are lucky in that our agents enjoy a very high retention rate, right? They are trusted advisors. They are viewed that way. Somebody find that, the customers within their book are with them. That turnover is very, very small and very rare, right? Which is a testament to them and the business that they do. But let's just say somebody said, don't contact me anymore. I don't want you to email don't voicemail me, don't call me, don't send me that mass message that says, hey, open enrollment is coming soon. Like any one of those things, right? Let's just say that somebody says that. Where do you store that? As an independent agent or agency, where do you put that to make sure that you or no one else in your office does that?
Yeah, that's right. So that it can be actioned, so that the systems don't pass those around.
Right. Yeah. So we use tools. We use Total Expert as our marketing operating system. And then we have Rebel IQ. I'm going to give them a shout out because they are such great partners, are doing our digital landing pages. And then we use Survey Loop, which is our customer feedback mechanism, all of those pieces together. And so when that don't marketing preference, if you will, don't call me, don't text me, you can email me, you can call me. When those come in, we can store those digitally for them, right? And so, and once it's do not opt out, when it's do not contact, you're done. It doesn't matter. Like, you can't go back in and say, oops, change my mind. I'm going to, like, it's done. And so you don't actually, there isn't that worry that someone, you have to remember that piece of paper that's tucked under the corner of your desk. Mary Jo doesn't want you to call her anymore,
Well, and to your point, Mel, I think, when you're doing, paper files and things like that, if you're marking it as do not call, there could be situations where another agent or agency gets that record, calls them, but because it's not recorded electronically, you are then already out of compliance with them.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about this a little bit in some previous episodes where realistically, the way that the regulations are going with the FCC is universal opt-outs, where if a consumer opts out, it's basically through all channels. And that's where we see these regulations going in the future. And so you're going to want to make sure that you start planning for your systems where if a customer opts out, that it's properly stored and transmitted across all the platforms that do communications. And I think that's a very, very important point. So, All right. So, Mel, one of the other things I'd like to discuss, one of our previous episodes, in episode 7, we talked about how to properly plan operationally to comply with new regulations. So could you provide us some insights on what you do operationally when you identify a new regulation comes through from like the CMS that affects your business or your agent's business?
Yeah, the lawyers come along and tell us what that means, right? First of all, we do get that interpretation, which is great. Again, we guide our agents. We tell those that are employed by us, right? And then we guide the agents that contract with us because ultimately they're masters and commanders of their own businesses. But we get that ruling, we understand what it is, and then we start the educational trip, right? So that is, we send out the email bulletin communications. We try to make it as informative without being really long because it's hard to wade through all that language, right? Mm-hmm. So we try to keep them snippets, obviously adult learning styles. We try to bring all those into play in the communications. We also do it in different methods, right? And so one is that bulletin that we send out. We have a bunch of webinars. Sam George, I'll give her a shout out on our side. She's fantastic about managing webinars and the interpretation and how to get this content out. And so we have all kinds of different things, whether it's Tech Tuesdays for platforms or, Mondays for CMS updates, like those kinds of things. So that goes out. And then we have relationship managers that sort of, are the people that those agencies, I'll say roll up to because that's an organizational structure, but they are relationship managers by trade, and they actually, help those brokers within their catchment area, for, again, lack of a better term. And so there are touch points regularly with those RSMs as well as relationship managers to make sure that that information is getting conveyed. So we really do try to do that in a multifaceted way. And so whether that's virtual training with a webinar, the email with the bulletin, we have a marketing memo, we can drop things in there too, right? Because we try to do more than just email because, again, especially at this time of year, agents are bombarded with carrier updates left and right in their emails, right? And so we really try to find ways, even if we could do a little social graphic that just helps you understand that one little nuance, right? That just help it capture your attention about what that particular thing is. We try to find like just different ways to cut through the noise to help that information get passed along.
Yeah, and that's really interesting too, Mel. You mentioned how, within your vertical specifically, the CMS will make rules. Those rules are then basically interpreted by the different carriers that are there. And then those interpretations, which can vary from carrier to carrier to carrier, I would say it's almost equivalent to like within the TCPA, how there's like different circuit court interpretations of the regulation. But anyways, those carriers, once they pass it down to the agents and agencies, they have to comply with that. And if they don't comply or a lead generator doesn't comply, then the carrier can say, hey, Mr. Lead Generator over here, we're going to kick you off of our network. We're not going to do business with you anymore. None of our agents can work with you. And it can be very dangerous, which is, I think, for the insurance vertical, a very, very interesting dynamic because you have translations by other private organizations, by multiple private carriers that are out there, and it's disseminated amongst the different agencies.
Thankfully, I don't buy leads for Medicare. I mean, what we do on the P&C side and things are different, but in this particular space for Medicare, we actually don't buy leads. The agents might themselves, but I don't buy them for agents, right? What we do is help them be successful within their local communities with digital tools, right? And so whether that's making the best of Google and how do you optimize that is our strategic partner survey loop, right? How you work with that on your Google My Business profile page, SEO, like those kinds of things. And then community-driven events, because at the end of the day, these are relationships that are face-to-face where you're literally sitting across the kitchen table, right? I mean, those are the really successful agencies. So how we provide those local grassroots marketing activities, support for them so that they can get out there in their communities, that's really where we focus on the Medicare side. But again, that TCPA is still there because they can still come. They could be at an event, right, in a park, on a table, and there's people to talk to them, and people can't stick around because the line's long. And so we give them a landing page on a laptop that somebody could come and sign in and say, hey, could you contact me later? And guess what? Get that consent to contact, right? And then later on, even when they reach out to them, right, you've got that consent to contact. Then there's a scope of appointment. When you set up that appointment, you determine what that scope of appointment is going to be. And then there's a specific timeline in terms of when you can actually talk to that person within that specified timeline for the scope of appointment. So even though we're not buying leads and it's like I bought that from XYZ lead provider, there's still this whole intersection of the consent to contact and the TCPA that you have to collect, right? And in order to be compliant, and that's the part I think that is our, I'm going to call it a mountain, or perhaps it's a hill, the man that climbed up a hill and came down a mountain, right? Like that's the thing we have to do, is to just really educate the agents that it is more than the CMS consent to contact. You really do need that TCPA in as well.
Yeah, it really does, because and it's interesting with these intersecting, and it's probably not obvious or abundant, but even the personal liability of doing that thing wrong can impact the agents, right? So you're helping to translate that so that they could be more compliant, following those and translate those pieces, because it is, you got the CMS, which is obviously trying to protect the Medicare Medicaid system, but it's also trying to protect the senior population to make sure those things are administered correctly.
That's why they're there. That's 100% why it's there. Yeah.
And then the FCC interacting with their rules about communications, right? About harassing communications are too abundant. This can affect the senior population as well. And then
you're not truthful. Truth in lending, right? There's truth in Medicare as well, and what you say and what you provide, and plans and benefits and approvals and like all that kind of stuff. It's really important. And to your point, Ben, it is there to protect the seniors so that they're not taken advantage of, right? Like that's the whole, so it feels cumbersome and stuff, but it's the right thing to do. And again, from our side, we provide that guidance, but ultimately, I mean, again, we are absolutely legally liable for what our employees do. But for the agencies and agents that sign on with us, there's a service where we're providing that ruling interpretation, and then again providing the assets that fit around the marketing assets and programs that they can execute. We give them playbooks and things that they can use if they choose. Ultimately, that like they run their own business, and it's up to them to choose what they do.
Yeah, and I think, Mel, with that, one of the things I think that you touched on when it came to the importance of really just using technology, right? So when you're providing these landing pages, those landing pages have to have the correct disclosures, but no matter what, those pages also have to have tools and technologies that are on them that store that consent. So in a situation where you either have a TCPA claim or something with the CMS or some federal agency is coming down to you can actually provide them with a certificate of that interaction that shows a replay of them submitting the form, the proper disclosures that are there, so that way you can help mitigate those complaints. One other thing that I want to talk to you about real quick here, you did mention survey loop and the importance of gathering reviews. How does that affect your agents, from both from a marketing perspective, a sales perspective, and a compliance perspective?
I mean, the review, it's like asking for the sale or asking for the referral, right? So we're not just blasting out and saying, hey, right? So there is that request to do that, and they are asking that at the end of the appointment, just in the same way you ask for a referral, we're asking them to ask for the review. Mm-hmm. And then we have a trigger within the system that knows they've consented and then allows them to send that review back. I mean, obviously the point of that review in the end is, it's so funny because reviews are like, oh, I got a 4.0 star, or, I'm 5 stars, which is fantastic. But ultimately, the reason you really want that review is so that other people that you don't even know who are looking for your service in your area, Medicare agent near me, right, will pop that up, see that when it pops up, and be able to look and say, oh, this person looks credible and they can help me based on these reviews that I see. It gives me that confidence factor that contact that I'm about to make is the right decision. Even if my friend referred me, I'm still going to go look them up and then confirm that that person is who my friend said they were. So there's a credibility there for the people who are actual referrals. And then there's that increased sale, if you will, for the opportunity for increased sale for all the people I have no idea are even looking for me in the first place. So that's the way we use reviews. But again, you ask for it in the first place, right? I mean, it comes in with when we ask you about, we ask you for your opt-in, and we tell you the ways we're going to connect with you, and we ask you to agree to that, and then we store that.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's really important that, my background with using, with soliciting for reviews is you want to do it obviously after the sale is closed with that, or the policy, whatever it may be with that customer. But reviews are so important, right? You've got various sites that are out there. Consumers, before they may do business with you, they're going to go online. They're going to research you. They're going to research the BBB.
Research peanut butter, right? Which peanut butter tastes better?
I mean, you think about it. Even I buy products from Amazon, right? You go online, you look at the product, and you're like, okay, well, this one has 4.5 stars. This one is probably a product that I'm going to buy. Whereas one that has 1 or 2 stars or no stars, there's, you might be a little bit leery about purchasing that particular product. So I just wanted to ask you that. Another thing here, where do you see the future trends in relation to in regards to regulations for capturing of consent, consumer privacy, patients' medical privacy, et cetera, within your industry and other verticals as well?
So I'm not going to speak on behalf of my company. I'm just going to speak on behalf of me here, right? It's just going to continue to get tighter to protect us all, right? Regardless of like whatever we're asking. That's my personal opinion. We see it tweak and tighten over time. I mean, medical health information, HIPAA has that covered, right? Like you can't share that information, and we absolutely do not share that. We don't share any of that with outside of our 4 walls, and it's a need to know basis only. It's not even like everybody who's in the company gets access to it. You have to have a need to know to have it, otherwise you don't get it. So there's that. But in terms of like marketing preferences and how you contact me, when you contact me, just because I said yes over here doesn't mean that you can blanket that yes all over the place, right? You're going to have to collect I think you'll ultimately end up having to collect those explicit opt-ins for the channels that you want to do business with and the providers of whomever it is that you're trying, just because I said yes to this insurance guy doesn't mean I said yes to that one, right? And so you have to, those are tightening. We see that with, I did notice there was a quick little question in there that I saw. So as we don't run a call center for Medicare, so I can't speak to that specifically, but when a call comes in, for instance, someone calls from a newspaper ad, right? And Steve's not available, but you're going to transfer that to Mary because Mary can help you. Right. You're going to have to ask for that, right? And say, is it all right if I transfer you to Mary because Steve's not here? And I think the challenge is going to be how we all address that and manage that going forward. And I don't know that any of us have really nailed that interpretation down solidly yet.
Yeah.
Because phone systems have something to do with that, right?
Well, and I think, Mel, to your point, when we look at these, both consumer privacy laws as well as the CMS rules, the CMS rules, the one that's coming out on October 1st talks about data sharing. It doesn't actually say, hey, only PII data. It says if you are sharing beneficiary data, you have to get consent to transfer that customer's information to a third-party marketing organization. And, we're starting to see this. We're seeing this with the FCC ruling that's coming in January as well. The one for CMS is obviously coming early on October 1st. But the trends within the industry is that you have to capture consent to contact customers, to store their information. You have to be very, very careful with how you're storing it, what information you're sharing with third parties, and and who has access to that information, right? Because when you're dealing with socials, date of births, there's all these different security breaches that are going out, and you don't want to be liable for that.
No.
And it's, I think, really, if there's a takeaway from this for our audience in relation to that, it's, if you are currently not capturing consent to contact your customers, you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to start talking with the different lead generators that you work with as well. So one of the things that we've talked about on other webinars, but it's just important if we have new members to our audience here, is that when you are talking with your lead generators, you want to make sure that you understand how they are designing their forms for these new regulations. So in the past, we all know that there's most of the forms that are out there. You've got a customer, they fill in their information. There's a disclosure at the bottom that says the information can be shared up to X number of partners, and that information is passed on to the buyers of that record, right? The future state is that the consumer has to be able to choose who their information is being sold to, whether that's done via check boxes, cards, etc. That is where we see these regulations going. In addition to that, there's already, there's different state privacy laws that are out there. We expect in the long run, there's probably going to be a federal privacy law in relation to patient data, just consumers' data, how you're storing it, what information you can store and share with other parties. So if you take anything away from this, capture that consent, store the consent. You want to use tools, whether it's a CRM or in our case, we use Active Prospects Trusted Form to keep that consent.
We use them too.
Yeah, exactly. And so in the situation where you do get audited by, whether it's CMS or some downstream, some government body, it's real easy for you to be able to present that information to those regulators and basically finish their investigation into your organization.
Mike, to your point there, just to add on to that, the one thing I think that actually really does help us on the Medicare side too is, the landing pages, they don't just go into like this pit and then a bunch of people pick it up, right? They're one-to-one. So the agents have their own. And then in the in our CRM, so a lead that fills out from one of Rebel IQ's landing pages, for instance, and says, yes, please contact me, and checks that box in, right? It's going to go into that agent's CRM. So it doesn't get shared and distributed across a bunch of people for somebody else to pick up. In that case, it's actually going directly to that person. So that helps, right? Like there's a lot of one-to-one marketing from agents and even within agencies that have that process, right?
Yeah,
so
and that's my understanding of the issue that CMS was seeing or concerned about, or the FTC, around a transaction of a senior, and then that data being passed on to other providers without transparency or without knowledge. It's for the enrollment process, which is what it's for. But when it goes beyond that, trying to keep that, under control. And from a privacy perspective, what I think is interesting about your business model is that it's really the date that the data you're collecting for enrollment is really pre-HIPAA. It's before the rules that protect those of privacy. The HIPAA components become enforced after that, when it's to the carriers and at the insurance company, and the payment of all those information and the processing. But it's at this point, I think they were trying to address that's just before, where they wanted to extend some privacy protections around that, and which relates to data sharing, which is really interesting with another entity that's all connected with trying to help the senior population.
That's right.
So real quicker, we want to take some questions from our audience. Mel, we've got one here that I think you can answer. So what are the potential pitfalls associated with non-compliance with CMS rules?
Oh, ouch. Perhaps you won't be an agent selling anymore, right? If you're not complying with those rules from an agent. I mean, even from an FMO, right? They can essentially shut you down in terms of like allowing you to write contracts for carriers. I mean, they're very, very serious about them.
Yeah, and when I was reading up on this part myself, the CMS, it really kind of depends on where you are in the chain to some extent. If the CMS ends up finding a carrier for certain practices that are done by downstream TMOs where leads were generated, they may go. The carrier may say, "Hey, you want to know what? We're not doing business with this lead generator anymore," which essentially shuts them down inadvertently. Or there's fines that are done, or they can have licenses revoked, what you name it. And
again, it can be anything from a small fine to being shut down. I mean, anywhere along the spectrum, depending on the interpretation of how egregious your default was, right? I mean, I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, but I think that's a logical statement, right? In terms of what could happen to you.
Yeah, and I think it's when we translate this over to the TCPA, we do get some questions from our audience about, does the TCPA, does it apply to small businesses? Does it apply to, an organization that only has a couple people in it? Non-compliance with the TCPA is a big no-no. And the reason why is because you can be fined $500 to $1,500 per call. You can get a class action lawsuit that can result in millions of dollars. And the way that the regulation is written, it does not matter the size of your organization. And it's the same thing with these regulatory bodies like the CMS when they make rules. You need to abide by what the agency is writing.
Yeah, and even from a TCPA, even some personal liability, there's been cases where individuals are specifically named in the case for that. So it can translate all the way down to the individual, not just to the company, which is scary when you think of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see here. How does consent to contact work with calls transfers? Does each transfer recipient need consent to contact? So this one is
your interpretation, right?
Yeah.
And then being interpreted. I think everybody's scrambling to physically understand exactly what that is and what that looks like. And I mean, I certainly can't speak definitively on that topic yet. I know everybody's working really hard to figure out how to handle that.
And it's been a hot topic here at Active Prospect. We've had many, many questions about this particular ask in general. In relation to the CMS rules, where really, if you look at the purpose of that rule, it talks about data sharing, right? You need to have consent for that TPMO to transfer the data to them. So in a situation where, let's say you're a lead generator that calls those leads and then live transfers them to another agent or agency, well, and when I look at this interpretation of the rule, and again, you should seek legal advice on this, you likely do need to get consent to transfer that data to the party that is receiving that transfer in that process. So it's just something to think about. We do get this question a lot, but we do advise that you get legal advice on this.
I mean, I think it's also down to like the earlier thing I said before, where like I have a print ad, right? Or we still do have those, or I have an ad on a website and somebody clicks through and then they call the office. There's no particular name. It was just the office, right? And now the receptionist picks it up and says, "Oh, I see Steve's available. I'm going to transfer you." And then suddenly Steve's not available, and now we need Mary Jo. Like, what does that look like? And that's what we're really trying to figure out. Like, what does that mean? And how do we have to go back to that person and say, Steve's not available, but Mary Jo is. Can I now transfer you to Mary Jo? I mean, like, that's the nitty gritty, I think, of trying to figure all this out.
Yeah, I think it's the unintended consequence, right? Because there is a real genuine value in that of transferring someone to help you, but it intersects with the unintended consequence of, is this another entity? Is this another party? I didn't agree to that. I'm hearing lots of active discussions in compliance and legal circles around people trying to solve for that and potential solutions, but it's unclear. But the business is going to keep rolling and do its best to comply with those considerations.
Mm-hmm. There is actually a great question about what are some of the main challenges guidance solutions faces when educating agents about the importance of compliance with both TCPA and CMS regulations. They're all very, 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 very familiar with CMS regulations. TCPA, not so much, right? And so there is really, it's like teaching anybody something they've not ever really heard of, or they feel that this one that governs their particular business, CMS, right? They said this. Who's this guy over here, right? So just now, and yet in their personal life, they know what TCPA is, right? Because I get all those robocalls. So, but just melding those two together and getting agents to understand. Again, it's not because they can't. It's just a whole different world that they've not really paid attention to in that space before. And then add on to the fact that they're getting all these other carrier updates, and like finding that time to be able to grab some brain space to be able to sort of, because you can't go out there across the country and like sit somebody down in front of you and say, let me tell you about this, but it's important. So how do you do that? And so the best way I can think of to do that is to make sure that on the marketing assets that I provide and in the tools that I provide and the strategic partners that I'm working with, that we build those protections in for them so that they're successful regardless of whether they understood it or not.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting too, because when you are educating employees, some of them learn differently, right? You can send an email and 25% of your employees will read it. And of the ones that read it, not all of them will understand it. So I'm a big fan of when you are educating your employees, there's obviously different methods to communicate it, but you want to use different mediums, whether it's a video, you send out an email, you do a live training on a webinar that you ask them to join. You want to make sure that you are providing them with different ways of being able to read and consume the information from a compliance perspective. Right. Otherwise, if you're just sending out an email, I could tell you there's going to be a decent chunk of your employees who may not read it. Sometimes they don't even get it. It goes into junk, right? So you want to think about that when you're educating your employees for compliance purposes. You want to make sure that there are different ways that they can access it, that they understand it. And, when you're dealing with situations like a TCPA versus CMS, that you very clearly define the differences and that they know that they are covered under both, right? So using the CMS as an example, there's that manual dial component of it, which is going to be very challenging for some agents and agencies. You've got people who've been in the field, they're not capturing consent, they're calling with their cell phones. Well, guess what? That's going to be covered on October 1st. So you want to make sure that your agents and agencies understand that there is now a manual component to this with this new CMS update that's coming in October.
It's a very busy space.
Yeah.
Ever evolving, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one. I'll try to translate this question. Consent to contact, storing information, sharing data. The question, does this apply to aggregators and publishers? From a perspective of TCPA, do want to understand, seek legal advice, but it's widely understood. Both sides, the lead buyers and the sellers, need to document the consent to contact transaction. That is something I do share in guidance with customers when talking with them. And sometimes there's a surprise because they're used to the older model where a consent transaction happened, and if needed it, they could pass it along. That's not going to be allowed in January 2025 next year. It is one-to-one. It's increasing the transparency by those entities being named. And both, if there's an inquiry or a legal case, whether it's an inquiry from a regulator or a potential claim in a lawsuit, that becomes part of your defense, having something like a trusted form certificate that helps document that transaction that happened. But yes, that is some new awareness that both sides are going to need that consent to contact transaction.
Let's see here. So how can businesses operationally plan to comply with new regulations, especially as it relates to CRM data as they are introduced? So this is something that is a challenge, right? Especially, Mel, you deal with this in the insurance vertical, me working in financial services. We had new rules and regulations that came out. Some of this depends on the size of your organization. So if you have a legal department that's a decent size, they're often monitoring for these risks for your firm and then communicating that to the appropriate channels. If you don't have something like this, then you may want to contract with a lawyer, have a retainer for a lawyer where you can seek this type of advice on a monthly or quarterly basis related to your specific industry. Now, once you get that translation, then you have to operationally plan to implement it within your CRM or contact center platforms, right? So that's communications amongst the appropriate parties, whether it's your marketing, your IT, your BI teams, et cetera, making sure that they are staying compliant with those interpretations, and then communicating that operational plan.
Yeah, and overall, the comment that relates to privacy laws. So you would want to have someone who's monitoring and making you aware, because that's data sharing. But then if you're in certain industries, that's where there's other regulations or regulatory pieces. So for healthcare and for communications with FCC and healthcare with HIPAA and CMS and all those components as well. But yeah, those instances are personal data, which subjects to privacy pieces, but then there's additional industry considerations. So good legal advice to help you keep current on the developments, which are fast and furious in this space for personal data, for sure.
I know I wasn't the only one hanging here waiting for the CMS final rule, right? I'm sure a lot of people on the phone were too, right? And that's what you do, is you just you have to wait out and like constantly be looking for those updates. And then it isn't sort of like this one and done and then you forget it. I mean, we keep the lawyers very busy and happy, and they in turn keep us happy and safe with the interpretations, right?
Yeah. Trusted advisors, yeah. All right. Is there one last question before we?
Yeah, I got one here. How do CMS and TCPA regulations pertain to chatbots, automated and otherwise, on websites? Yeah, so this one is fun and exciting. So, there's chatbots have different interpretations, right? You've got the ones that are actually embedded on the web page that, you can converse with a customer, whether it's through AI or through an agent that's doing it. And then there are chatbots that are used through automated communications to customers when it's done through like text message and email, and they also have AI tools. For the purpose of this discussion, when we're looking at a chatbot for automated communications to customers, the rules still apply, right? So if you have contracted with a third-party service that sends automated text messages and responds and replies with AI, if that third party does something that is non-compliant, you could be held liable for it, right? So you want to make sure that you are regularly auditing what those transcripts are. You want to make sure that their opt-out policies are correct. You want to make sure that your contract with them is buttoned up for liability purposes, and that you've communicated what you expect from a regulatory standpoint for the TCPA and CMS. Now, on a regular website, where you're dealing with a chatbot where there's, the customer may put in personal information, it's a social security number, a date of birth, et cetera. You want to make sure that those tools, what are they storing? What PII are they storing? Is it stored in a secure location? Is there certain components of the chatbot tool, if one of your agents are using it, where it may hash out social security numbers and transcripts of that chat? There's a couple other things that can be done with that, but it's important to understand that these chatbots and tools you are liable for the activities that are done on this. So you want to make sure that if you're using a third-party organization to do it, that your contracts are buttoned up and you've conveyed that message to them. And then internally on your own website, the main thing to look out for is really customer data, right? Where's that data stored? How long are they storing it? What, if somebody accesses it, what's available to them in the transcripts, things like that.
Yeah, and notice and consent plays an important role in those services as well. You can't skip over that. Creative uses of including the notice, whether it's automated or not, and then links to landing pages for capturing consent. The theme continues and is universal there as well.
Mm-hmm. We do have a couple of questions around cell phones. And so, again, I think that's in the area of like, how do we use those safely? Because we all know salespeople use cell phones, right? But there is there has been a requirement that calls are recorded and those recordings are kept. And of course, that's not ever happened on cell phones before, right? And so, again, that's going to, now that piece is
right
becoming more prevalent, again, that's stuff that we need interpretation to help with. So what does that mean? Does that mean we have to have phone apps on cell phones now that people can call through those cell phones, which is really connected to our CMS? I don't know, but that's the stuff that we're looking for advice on. Just like if you send out a piece of direct mail that says, hey, it's going to just come from an insurance agency is going to call you, but it doesn't say Mary Jo's going to call you. Like, what does that look like? And so these are the things that we're all hanging with bated breath for our attorneys to help us interpret, to make sure that we function in a safe and right way.
All right, excellent. Well, wonderful discussion today. Mel, thank you very much. And any closing items before we to bring it all together from us?
Yeah, I would say, from operationally, what you want to take back from this is, with these new CMS updates that are coming in October, you want to start talking with your lead generators and brushing up your forms. One of the most important things is that, within the CMS ruling is that the customer has to explicitly choose your organization, whether that's done by a checkbox, et cetera. You want to make sure that they are choosing your organization before that record is sold to you. In addition to that, you want to review what the disclosures are on those pages. So you can ask those partners or go on their landing pages, look what that disclosure language is that's available to them, and make sure that meets your compliance requirements. So that's my takeaway. Mel, if you've got something, if not, then we can close it up.
No, I'm going to say ditto to that, because you couldn't have said it any better, Mike.
All right, great. Well, thanks. So now we're going to have a poll. Please fill this out if you're interested in learning more about Active Prospect Solutions. We'd be happy to reach out to you in those regards as well. Stay tuned. We've got some more webinars coming up. Our next FCC episode is going to be in 2 weeks on Wednesday, August 21st. We're going to have John Henson from the Troutman Amin Group law firm, and also Chris Deathridge from Apollo Interactive. Also very focused, almost exclusively focused, continuing on CMS with that deadline coming up. So stay tuned for that one for some great awareness. Also a plug for REACH, the Responsible Enterprises Against Consumer Harassment. You can get more information at reachmbc.com. This is the industry association for lead generation buyers, sellers, technology solutions. We're the ones who are trying to help advocate for industry translations of these rules and to advocate on your behalf. So please go to them for some information and how you can become a member and be aware of their association and updates. We share some great links in the chat here today, activeprospect.com, trusted forum/verify. Also the cms.gov rules. If you like to read rules from CMS, of course, go there as well. And myguidedsolutions.com for information about Melanie Marsh and their group. Upcoming events here at Active Prospect. We've got the Keller Williams Mega Agent Camp that's coming up in Austin, Texas, where we've got all the real estate agents in there for a collection of that and helping to make them aware of the risks of TCPA that can apply to the Real Estate Agent Association. And then also be on the lookout for us later in August at Contact.io in Denver. So looking forward to that. But thank you, Mel. Great session. And thank you for all the information and awareness. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great.